250 pixels. We'll feather that again up another 100 pixels for safety. Right click and select inverse. Image adjustments curves. And we can darken that outside edge down. Now she doesn't really need a lot of contrast. She already has it. But if I wanted to go into curves, I could definitely add some contrast to this. I could make the water murkier by pulling up in the shadow area, pulling down again. So you can see just that little bit of murkiness that we added to the outside edges. Now I already love the colors in this, so I just want to take it one step further. And I want to go into my curves and accentuate what we already have. So I am going to my blue curve. What we have naturally is what I've already been doing to my other pictures. We have the shadows that are blue and the highlights that are yellow. So I'm just accentuating that by pulling up and making the water a little bit more blue and her skin a little bit more yellow. And then adding some red into the highlights of the image. Okay. So I like where this image is going a lot, and I want to add some texture to it though, because I want to give this image, which is very, very smooth right now, something that's a little bit grittier. That's just the style that I love. Now, I don't actually know where my textures are on this computer, but we're going to see what we can do about that to find them. I'm sure that they're somewhere in Bridge, somewhere lovely. Nope, not there.
Have you ever purchased any kind of stock photography, or do you take all of your own textures?
I take my own textures now. I didn't used to. I used to get them from a Flickr site. You can find textures so easily on Flickr if you do a search, and a lot of people give them away for free. And so, yeah, I used to use those, but now I give mine away for free. So that's a good place to go if you do want textures. I have 20 of them available at the moment. But yeah, I try to shoot my own textures wherever I go now, and it's really funny because I was just on a tour of a castle, and everybody was taking pictures of the rooms, and I was like in the corner photographing the baseboard and stuff, and the tour guide, she was like, I've never seen anyone do that before. and I was like, yeah, it's a great texture. So yeah, I try to shoot them whenever I can. I don't know where my textures are though, so I'm going to try to find them on this computer. But if anybody can give me some advice, maybe. That's actually pretty good. Oh, is somebody else?
Brooke, can you put it in the search?
In the meantime, thank you.
I do have one more question that I could ask.
Yes, absolutely.
So Sammy Lane from the chat rooms is wondering if you actually add grain to your photos as well?
Very rarely. I rarely add grain. Usually that's pretty much done with the texture.
Okay.
So the texture is going to be so gritty that adding grain is just going to sort of mess up the skin a little bit. And I'll talk about how I preserve the skin in just a second. So these are actually the textures that are being given to anybody who purchases the course. So I thought I would just open those up here, take a look through them. Those are the birds too. Okay, so I am going to choose this one. And when I am choosing a texture, I sort of have two categories of textures. There's the painterly texture, and then there's the texture that is very gritty, very film-like, like as if you were looking through an old film camera. Now this one is sort of a mixture, because this one you can almost see brushstrokes running through it, which I love, and that will give it a sort of painterly look, but you also have a lot of grit and grime. And this was just taken on the side of one of my cooking pots at home. So I am going to use the move tool, and I'm actually not sure where we are here. There we are. So I'm just going to drag this away if I can a little bit to sort of see all of my layers here. So this is my texture. I'm on my move tool, and I just want to move one image on top of the other. So I am clicking anywhere in this image, dragging it to the tab that we're working on, and then just dropping it on top. You can also select it, copy it and paste it. That would also work, no big deal, however you want to do it. Now this texture is indeed smaller than the image, so we're just going to stretch it. Now I've never had any issues with stretching my textures before. It's always been something that I've done from the beginning. I've printed with all of the textures much smaller than this one, and it's been just fine. So it's just been my personal experience, but obviously the bigger the texture, the better. So I'm going to edit, retransform, and I'm just going to click and drag this right along the image and then hit the check mark. So once I have that texture on there how I want it, this is the point where I want to blend it. Now I use my textures in black and white only. I never use a color texture. And the reason is because I do my texturing last. It's the very last step of what I'm going to do. So that means that I've already colored my image. I already have a nice blue in the back and yellow on the skin, and that's how I like it. So if I had a texture in here that was orange and red and blue all over, that sounds like a joke. If I had that, then I would basically be messing up the color of my picture. You'd have splotches of orange and splotches of red and things like that. So I convert all of my textures to black and white. So I'm clicking that on, and we have the layer mode normal here. That's what you're going to default to. I'm going to click that layer mode, and I'm going to find soft light within my layer modes. So if I click soft light, you can see that it's blended the texture into
Claire's
the image.
face was awesome.
Now here's the issue. If you leave it on normal,
You guys
and
want
you
a
take the
blankie?
opacity down, you can see that it's just sort of like a layer on top of everything. It's dulling the highlights, it's making the shadows a lot brighter, and I don't want to do that. I want to preserve the contrast that we already have in the image. So that is why I use soft light. Now if you're using a texture that isn't showing up enough with soft light, you can try hard light, and that'll just make it a little bit rougher, show up a little bit more. But in general, I really like to use soft light for blending my textures. And if you have a specific mode that you like best, please feel free to use it. That's just what I tend to do. So I'm going to just pull this layers tab up again. I'm going to create a layer mask, just like we did for the other image, on that layer with the texture. Now the reason is this: I rarely ever use my textures exactly as they are. So instead of leaving the texture over her skin, I don't want it to look like an overlay. I want it to look like it's part of the image. So I want to erase it off of her skin, not only for that reason, but because if it is on her skin's going to look scaly. So if I zoom in here as it is, she does not have the prettiest skin at the moment, but if I take it off, you can see it's a lot nicer. So I don't want to give her, especially on the legs, my goodness, I don't want to give her that extra texture that she does not need on her skin. So I want to erase it off of the skin. So I'm going to use my brush tool on black.
You can go on
The
it now.
opacity anywhere is fine.
Do you know how to
As long as
record
it's
it
not
now?
at 100% to start, you're pretty good. I don't use 100% because I still want the subject to look like she's part of the image. So if I were to erase it exactly off of her skin at 100%, she might look pasted into the image because she's not going to blend with the background.
If they want to stay,
So
then
I
you
am
can
just
take
clicking,
it.
making sure my hardness is at 0%, and then I am erasing it off of the subject.
There's one more show left before the Dragon Ball Z cut.
Now I want to bring that back a little bit from where I just erased it. So there. And here too, and I think that looks really nice. So we've added a texture, and of course you can change the texture as much as you want. You can clone stamp that texture, you can heel brush that texture, whatever you want to do, you can do it, and you can change the texture. I think that a lot of people tend to get textures and then just use it exactly as it looks, but that might not match your image. So as much as you can change the texture to fit your image, then you're going to have a more cohesive image. I'm going to save this one because I like this picture. Is it okay if I save it? I'm saving it. Okay. All right, so let's take some questions.
So actually, there is a question in here about saving your images.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where it is. So can you talk us through that a little bit? What should we
Absolutely.
look for?
Okay, so when I'm saving my images, I save them all as PSD files, the Photoshop file. I do that because that's going to preserve the layers that I've created. So if I ever need to get in there and take that texture away, which happens a lot for me, the reason why I would want to do that is because when you print, the texture is going to look a lot more enhanced than when you put it online as a little image. So sometimes I'll have a little bit more texture on my images that I release online versus the ones that I'm going to print. I just soften it a little bit for the print. So I do want to be able to go back to my layers. You could also save as a TIFF file and preserve those layers. I just like to save it as a PSD file, just personal. So once I've done that, I will also save it as a TIFF if I know I'm going to print it. My printer likes to print from flattened TIFF files, just what he likes to do, what he told me to do from the day one, so that's what I do for him.
Like in the next
If I'm going to put this on the internet, I'm saving it as a JPEG, and I am sizing it to no more than 700 by 700 pixels. That way people can't create any sort of decent print out of it. So that's sort of my process for saving my images. I have a naming system for my
You should
images,
record it,
so
just
whenever I save a file, I always save it Shaden underscore and then the name of the image, and then that way I can save it based on files, and I can search really easily through my files.
You just put it down right here, so
Cool, thank you. I don't know if you want to get a little bit more to textures, but there was quite a few questions about what do you look for.
Definitely.
What
Chris,
is, what
is
is
it
an
too cold
example
on
of a
your feet?
painterly texture?
Because Claire
How
has
do you
shoes
catalog
on.
them?
Definitely.
Okay.
Well, let's go back here into
You
Bridge.
save it, sweetheart? Yeah, of course.
Okay.
there's a couple
So, I'm just going to take a look. So this, for example, very, very gritty texture.